Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. This is Dave. I'm happy to be back with you again. Talking a little bit about hosting your podcast. You are starting your show. You're going to be the host of your podcast, whether you do it on your own or with a guest or with a co-host. Like we do here on the How to Podcast series, you're going to be the master of ceremonies, the ringleader, the person that's going to kind of drive the show and kind of direct where you're going, and you're going to lead people on the path to get to your destination. So as you think about your role as the host of your podcast, I have a few thoughts for you around this. I'm going to focus in on 4 main areas, but before we get to that, just want to encourage you in the early stages of your podcast, or if you've been doing this for a long time, that hosting is a skill. It's a muscle that you need to learn and you need to develop. I'm a musician. I've been playing music for 40 years, so I'm old. I get that. But I've been playing music for a long time. And one of the tricks that I do when I do my rehearsals on my own, when I'm practicing, is I like to practice in the dark or with my eyes shut when I'm playing a certain piece of music. And you've probably seen musicians that look at their hands when they play, like guitar or bass or piano, or when they're playing the drums. They're always looking at where their hands are going and what their next position, where they're going to move their hands to. I like to practice without looking, without a point of reference, and looking at what I'm doing. And it actually served me well when I was playing live with one of my bands I was playing with, and somebody, I guess, either tripped over or somehow hit the lights and shut the lights off on stage. And it was pitch black right in the middle of a song. And myself and the drummer, we just kept chugging away. The guitar player stopped, the singer stopped, but it became this little moment in the pitch black where myself and the drummer just chugged along in the song, and the crowd loved it because in that moment, it's like you can't see anything, but the music just kept chugging away. And it was because I didn't have to look at my fingers. I knew where I was positioned, and I knew my notes. And by muscle memory alone, I was able to salvage what could have been a really bad moment for our band. And it turned into a crowd-pleasing moment with cheers and applause as we just kept going. And when the lights came back on, the song was still going. And the rest of the band was able to join back in. So as I look towards hosting a podcast, this muscle we're developing, and it's going to take time. If you're new in podcasting, it's not something that's going to come naturally to you if you've never done this before. But as you do more and more interviews, as you do more and more co-hosted episodes, or as you just host your own episode like I'm doing here by myself, that you're going to develop a muscle that's going to serve you well when things go wrong. Many times now, I've had opportunities where things have gone wrong during a podcast, and I was able to put my guest at ease when they know that I know what I'm doing and that I have control of the podcast, and they feel comfortable with me being in charge of the show. There's just a level of confidence there. And when you meet with somebody as a host and they seem distracted, they seem frustrated, nervous, it makes you as a guest feel a little uneasy because you're not sure where we're going with the podcast, right? So I like to present myself as the host as someone who takes control of the pre-interview, takes control of the conversation, gives them the outline of who we're talking to before we hit record, letting them know the audience, who it is we're speaking to, how the structure of it is going to be. I'm going to ask you questions about this. We're going to move to this. And near the end, we're going to ask you to give you your call to action, where we can find you. I encourage my guests to say the name of their podcast or the name of their book or the name of their website, to say it over and over again during our time together so that the listener connects with where we want to send people. So little things like that. Right from the beginning, it's not like I'm looking at my guests, looking for them to lead me. I'm here to lead. I'm the host. So as you learn this muscle, when things go wrong or things go off track, you know that you have confidence in what you do because you've done it many times. For me now, I'm getting close to 500 episodes that I've hosted with guests across my 7 podcasts. So I've spent a lot of time developing this. And before all of this, I've worked in HR and human resources, and I would be the person that would do the interviews for job postings. I've done interviews for job placement companies and interviewed people all day. So you get to learn how to read people. You get to know what kind of questions work and what don't work. And it's going to take some time. So don't compare your first 10 episodes to somebody's 200th episode, because when they started, they didn't know what they were doing either. So don't get too hard on yourself. But as we look towards our role as the host of a podcast, there's a few things to consider that I kind of wanted to talk about today. There's just some basic golden rules around conversation. Just some thoughts. Keep your podcast short but interesting. You don't have to do a 3-hour Joe Rogan experience on your podcast. You can have a 10-minute interview. You can take a 1-hour interview and break it up into sections and have different podcast episodes built around the topic of your interview. You don't have to release it all as one big, huge file or long interview. You can break it into smaller pieces. It's one way to do that and get multiple content pieces from one interview. The other thing is, don't talk over each other. I hear this a lot in podcasting, especially if there's more than 2 people. I just did some editing for someone in Australia, and they needed some help with some ticking noises happening in their podcast. And when I listened, there's 4 voices in this podcast. And when they all start talking over each other, it becomes this big, muddy, kind of hard to understand moment during the podcast for a listener where you don't have no idea what's going on and who's talking and what's happening. So think about when you're hosting as well, that you want to kind of direct the conversation and you don't need to comment on everything that your guest is saying or your co-host is saying. You don't have to interject and you don't have to speak louder than them to make your point. You really need to give each other space. As a guest, as a host and a co-host, you need to create that understanding that there's going to be room for each of us to talk. Don't talk over each other. Pace yourself. And when you speak slowly and clearly. All of these things help people feel more comfortable, and they realize that you're in charge of what's going on in the podcast. So there's 4 things I want to talk about that I think you could put into place for your podcast as a host that will help you to become a great host, a host that your listeners come back for every single time because they love you and they love how you do your show. So here's a way to be a great host to your guest, your co-host, and also be an amazing host that brings listeners back. So number 1, do your research. Find out as much about your guest, about your co-host, about whoever's coming on your show that you can. Listen to them on other podcasts. Go to their YouTube channel if they have that. Check out their Instagram, their Facebook, their social media, whatever it is. Spend some time doing some research. I had a wrestler on my podcast, and a professional wrestler, and he came on And I found the intro that he was using that would be spoken when he came to the mat for every match. And it was from 10 years ago. And it was like this whole bunch of sayings and stuff. And it was how he was introduced. I used that in the intro of the podcast when he was on the screen. And his comment back in the recording was, I know that many people aren't going to know what that was that you just did, but I know that you did that for me. That's amazing. So doing your research and knowing something about your guest just opens that door to a great conversation and shows that you really do care. To meet your guest for the first time with no pre-screening, no pre-call, they show up on your screen, you say hello, they say hello, you hit record and say, hey, everybody, Dave is here from the How to Podcast series at howtopodcast.ca. Dave, I'm not good at intros. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us about yourself? That's not a good intro. That tells me as a listener that you as a host, you don't even know who you're talking to. And one of the things that I have as a listener is I have trust in you as a host, that you're going to bring on a guest that brings value to me as a listener and to the community of listeners around the show. So if you don't even know your guest and you can't even introduce them and you have no idea who they are, you're just doing an interview because it's time to record an episode. I'm going to struggle a little bit trusting you that you're bringing value and valuable guests to your show. So the first one, do your research. Spend some time. Get to know this person. If they're an author, go read the reviews around their books. Find out what people say about this person. Go and look in the comments in the YouTube video of them as a guest somewhere or them speaking on stage. Whatever. Are they a TEDx speaker? Do they have a website? Okay, go to their website. What does it look like? Does it look nice? Talk about the links. Oh, they have a free link to a downloadable 10-step guide to something or other. You know about that. That's great. You can bring that up in the conversation. I love having the website of my guest up on the screen while I'm talking. Because if there's any point in my conversation where I need something else to spark the next question, I can just look on the screen and I know I'm on their website. And I can say, hey, on your website, I noticed that you have a book coming out next year. Can you talk about that? Oh, that's great. Yeah, actually I can. It just opens another door. Okay? Do your research. The next one, number 2, plan out your questions. Now, I've listened to shows where they have the same questions they ask every guest. I'm kind of torn on this because part of me says I like the idea that it's, as a listener, you can kind of expect what's going to happen. As a guest, though, I'm just going to listen for those 5 questions. I'm going to prepare my answer, and it's going to seem really scripted because I already know you're going to ask me these 5 questions. And that doesn't give me a great listening experience because I already know what you're going to say. I've listened to some other podcasts about podcasting, and there's one in particular where the host takes each of their guests through the exact same steps, and I can almost do his interview for him because I've heard him say the same things to different people over and over, and he never changes it. It's always the same thing. How did you do this? How about this? I advise you to do this. The way I do it is this. And I can almost anticipate every question in order, and there's never any nuance. There's never any new questions. It feels really rote. It's very the same over and over and over and over. And I'm finding that I'm losing interest in that podcast because it's kind of boring in the sense that I can anticipate everything that's going to happen. So throw some variety in there. Plan out your questions. Even if you don't use them all, have some go-to questions. And one of the ones I love doing is at the end. You know, when at the end, get to the end of the podcast and the host asks, where can we find you? Where's your website? All of those great things. We ask the guests to tell us that. A lot of people see that as listeners. They see that as a signal that the podcast is over, that we're done here. And I don't really need to listen to the rest because it's in the show notes. I'm going to ditch here and I'm going to go into the office. I'm going to get out of the car. I'm going to go into the house and see my family. I'm done on the bike. I can stop now. So what I do, a little trick, is I say, I have one more question for you before we end. But before that last question, hey, Dave, can you tell us where do we find you? Where are you most active online? Tell us about your website. So now my listeners are like, oh, now I got to wait for that last question. What's Dave going to ask? And again, because it's not the same question every time I do this, you don't know. And to be honest, I don't even know sometimes what my last question is. And I'm listening to the person say their website and I'm thinking, come up with a question, Dave, because there's nothing written on my paper at that point. And I'm trying to come up with something that will work for them. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this, but plan out your questions. It's really going to help you to kind of know where you're going and give you an idea of what's next. Okay, so you've done your research. You've planned out your questions. The next step, number 3, you need to get yourself in the right mindset. Now, this can encompass all kinds of different things. One thing I would tell you to do is never podcast when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're reacting to something. If you got a nasty review on your podcast and you want to lash out at the person, you've had a horrible day, you've had a fight with your cat, I don't know. You never, ever, ever want to get behind a microphone and vent. I've actually heard podcast gurus brag that they think one of the best ways to get noticed is to start a fight with someone. I'm like, that is the worst ever advice I've ever heard from a podcast guru, is to go start crap with somebody just to get noticed and get views and start a war with somebody over something that was said. People do this on Twitter all the time, whatever. That's never podcast angry. There's a saying to never go to bed angry with your partner, but never podcast angry, please. And don't use it as a platform to attack people. Again, let's go back to the origin of this podcast, where a podcast guru made fun of one of my friends' podcasts and deconstructed their podcast in front of their audience and making fun of my friend as a way of showing off their skills and talents as a awesome coach. I don't know who would ever hire a coach who talks people down, which was what we see on American Idol, the TV show. I'm all about The Voice, where we have coaches that build people up and make people feel better. And even if you're not ready, let's get you the help you need to be really great at your podcast. Let's not talk down to people. So don't come to the microphone to start a fight. This microphone is powerful. You can say things that could destroy somebody's credibility. You could hurt somebody's feelings. You can destroy somebody's future. And you might look like a big jerk if you use a microphone in the wrong way. So please come to the microphone with the right mindset. Come to the microphone to serve. And to be a great host means that sometimes you and your opinions need to take a back seat. I have met so many people as a podcast host that I would never probably cross paths with. I have met people outside of my belief circle, outside of my background, and I'm better for it as a podcast host. because I learn from these amazing people that come across my path. And I'm a better person than I was before I had a podcast. You need to get outside of your circle, and you need to get into the right headspace when you come to the microphone. Do not podcast angry. And lastly, number 4, you're performing as a host. You really are. This is a performance. There's going to be days when you don't feel like coming to the microphone. There's going to be days where you're feeling not the best, a little under the weather, a little tired. You're here to perform. You're here to step up. Perform the interview, your podcast, whatever, with your guest in mind, with your listener in mind. You have a responsibility. You built this platform. And these people are showing up for you as a guest to come on your show, as a listener listening and pressing play on your podcast. You need to show up and do the thing and be consistent. So you need to be the one to set the tone for your podcast. So if I started my show like this, hey everybody, I'm having a terrible day and really don't want to be here, but it's Monday, and I promised that I would do a podcast every Monday, so I have no idea what I'm going to talk about, but, whatever. I'll just do this because I have to. Thanks for being here. I hope you get something out of this, because I'm not getting anything out of this. I wish I was doing something else, but podcasting is such a drag. Or, hey everybody, so glad to be here. Had a pretty rough week this week, but you know what? Coming here and being with you is everything that I think about and what I can't wait to do. And I anticipate our time together. We're going to have a great guest today. Dave is on the podcast today. Dave is here, and he's going to make my week better, your week better. Dave, welcome to the podcast. Do you see the difference? Be a real person. Share your story. Be real in front of your audience. But you are performing. You are the host of your show. And no one else can do the show the way you can. And your audience is here for you. We've all gathered together for your episode. We're all here. We love, support you. We care about you. We are your community. We have bought into your podcast. We want to see you succeed. And we are cheering you on. So remember, if you want to be a great host, research your guest, plan out your questions, get yourself in the right mindset, and perform the interview with your guest in mind. And all of these things combined will be everything you need to be a great host. And I can't wait to hear your podcast. howtopodcast.ca, little speak pipe button right there. Leave me a message and tell us about your show. And we will promote your podcast right here in front of the How to Podcast family and tell everybody about your show. Would love to do that. howtopodcast.ca. Speak pipe, click the button, record a message, and your voice will show up here on a future episode. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being there. Be a good host. Okay? Be a good host. We'll talk soon. Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know. It's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, all getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me, and I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through type service, I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you, whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.